all of you should have access to Landing Pad. As you know, Landing Pad is really the cloud web version of Gravity Sketch where you import and export files. So Landing Pad and the VR headset really go hand in hand, and the more you leverage having this, the easier your workflow will be. So in here, for example, this is my own workspace. You should have access to both your workspace and UC's, and you can filter by whatever you need. So I'm currently in my workspace and I have, well, several files, but I can filter by if I want to search for something. So you can find the actual sketch files. You can find reference images, which is something I will use for the demo. You can import and export CAD models too. If you have a CAD model, that will be your underlay that you can bring in here. Or if you have a sketch, a 2D sketch, you can bring it in here. It's a very, very powerful tool. Just know it's getting so good. They're really improving it. And there are some features that we will use called collab rooms. So once you've built something in VR, you can have multiple people co-designing in that same space. It's really powerful. Does anyone have any questions about Landing Pad, or have you run into any issues just before we go into actual VR? Does Landing Pad make sense so far? The good news also is if you go to the UC space, you will access and you will have access to many files from before, from previous studios that are pretty good, for both from students and from demos that we've done. There are some examples of final presentation rooms, which, heads up, you will do at the end of the semester. You'll create not only a 2D presentation, but you will build a VR room of the space your solution builds in. I know it sounds a bit intimidating. I promise you it won't be by then, especially if we start taking the right steps. Okay, so this is Landing Pad. It's important for you to know how to use this, because in here I'm uploading sketches and images that I will bring into VR, and I can also access what I've made in VR and export it back. So one thing to do is if you Google Oculus casting, this is how, it's very nice and simple. This is how you will be able to show on your computer or your phone whatever is happening on the headset. If you download the app, the Oculus app on your phone, that's another nice way to present. You can quickly cast it to your phone and you can have someone look at your phone and see what you're seeing in VR. I'm going to do the same in here. The specific caveat in here is you do have to be in the same Wi-Fi network. So your headset has to be in the same Wi-Fi as, in this case, my computer. So they are both able to synchronize. So let's get started. And please ask questions as we go. Let's see. So the first step to cast it is, I can't show you yet because I haven't cast it yet. But basically when I press my Oculus button, there should be an option that is called casting. Let me quickly, and also they just recently updated the menu. So let me see if they moved, I think they moved where the icon is, but that's okay. It's called Quest Link now, but it's in the menu. So just bear with me, it's connecting. And once it does, we should be good running the, oh, okay. I think they rebranded it. Give me 1 second. Yeah, I don't know why they moved it. Store info. Okay, found it. All right. I'll show you where I accessed it once it starts sharing. So it should be working now. Okay. So this is my VR headset. The where you find it is anywhere you are, even if it's the main menu or Gravity Sketch. When you press your Oculus button, this one, it should pop up a menu. And if you click on camera, this icon, one of those is casting. And if you're on the same Wi-Fi, you should find your device in here. Okay, please ask me questions if that didn't make sense. So I'm gonna open Gravity Sketch, which you have hopefully been playing with by now. let me know if I'm skipping through things that aren't clear or if you haven't really quite figured out anything in particular that I'm showing you. I'll try to do a bit of an intro explanation at the beginning, and then we'll build our vehicle package. But anyways, this is your main menu. One thing though is you probably have to log in to your account. So here's where you log into it. Let me find my email. Whatever email you're using, right? And then we have a password, so I'll just switch pretty quickly. Okay, 1 second. All right, should be logged in. So this is what it should look like when you log in. You have your name, your email, and then you can toggle between your space and UC's space. If I'm in UC's space, you can go into the files, and there's a lot. And also Gravity Sketch, they do a very good job at having a library of objects. So in the same way I gave you a Fusion folder with mannequins and things like that, well, Gravity Sketch has all of that built in. Let's start from scratch. So I'm gonna go to my own space, new sketch, nice and simple. The demo that they did was exactly like this. Let me just set a couple things from the beginning. So when you open your file, you should see something like this. You have your left controller, right controller. If you're left-handed, you can actually swap them. I think if you hit them sideways or something like that. Yeah, like this. Okay, they swap. And now this. So the tools for right-handed people, your tools should be on your right hand, right? Your settings should be on your left hand. One big advice I have is always look at the icons on your controllers because they change. Depending on what you're doing, that's a very good intro tip. Right now, for example, this color wheel is to change color, right? But this icon might change. Red for deleting. Blue is my main settings. Purple are my tools. All of those are very standalone buttons, but also pay attention to how icons keep changing. One important intro thing to know is the blue button, your settings. This will always be your settings. And become familiar with many of these. You usually select with your right controller and your trigger. So in the saving menu, you can take screenshots, you can save and export and import in your settings. One important one for you, and this is part of the demo, is mirror. So you should activate the mirror plane because what you are designing is mostly symmetrical, right? Here's where in the mirror plane you can do it. If you forget to do that, that's okay. There are ways you can bring it back. So mirror plane, play with some of these settings. For example, I'd like to leave smart move in the middle. World axis means this origin point. It's kind of nice. If you want to give yourself ground floor, I'm gonna activate it now. Then preferences, some other settings, workspace. It's the environment. Gravity Sketch can get really, really good environments now. So you can bring HDRI images and everything, for example. So if I click on the options, I can actually, modify and bring actual images and things like that. So it can get really good. For now, I'm keeping it simple. And then beta, you have a couple options. Tool belt is one that we will talk about eventually. It's basically when I enable it, I swipe from left to right like this, I have access to more precision tools. For now, that's not as important, but this is our starting point. So I haven't done anything just now. This is my settings button, the blue one. All the reference images that I can access will be found in here. All the reference models that I can access will be found in here. I can also import models. So in landing pad, if I upload any 3D model that I want to reference in here, I will find it over here. And then you also have your prefabricated model. So one that everybody will use is the chassis one. This is a very, very useful tool for precision, and same with the mannequin. So that's how we will start. And then just like Photoshop, you have your layers. Highly recommend you are organized with your layers. The more organized you are, the better you can edit and filter through different things. These are it also has orthographic capabilities. So once I have a model, it should show me some pretty nice orthographics. I mean, this is just a sketch line, but you can export that. And then tutorial. So I think, Cal, you were mentioning this is a pretty nice tool as you're creating, as you're sketching, and you want to figure out how to do something. Go into your settings and then this little hat, and you can filter through different menus. The benefit is I can watch them right here. I can speed them up, and I can be sketching and try modifying something as I'm watching the tutorial. Pretty nice. One big advice again is pay attention to the icons of the buttons because they might change, but for the most part, every button does the same thing over and over again. So the logic behind each button is the same. So that's my blue menu. The purple one are my tools. And again, I'm selecting with my right controller. For most of what we will do at the beginning, it's just more, line work. So ink and stroke. You can use revolve if you wanted to start building, some more complicated shapes, but Gravity Sketch is really powerful. I can do lots of things very quickly, very, very quickly, right? That's the benefit of VR. So Revolve is one, Surface, and just you can play with many of these. For now, I'll probably do the demo using Stroke. It's kind of nice. So when I click on Stroke, all of these tools have settings. I'd like to use, I mean, if I use the first one, I can just sketch, and when I let go of my trigger, it finishes the sketch. The point mode, it's really nice because it's very precise. Every time I click my trigger, it drops a point. I click again, click again, click again, and then with my left trigger, it just finishes. I guess this is more of an intro demo, so I'll just cover a few things before we make the package. I just want to contextualize, but please ask questions. So I've done this sketch right now. I have what's called a selection sphere. And if you look at my right controller, when I move the joystick, there's an icon of a sphere. So always look at the icons because they'll tell you what they do. I can grow the size. Basically, anything this sphere touches, I can modify. So right now it's just touching it, but I'm not pressing anything. But my grabbing button is my right controller inside. So anytime I want to grab anything, it's this button, right? And then notice how when I grab something with this button, look at how the icons are going to change. So my icons change. The blue button is no longer the main settings. Right now it's for points. So if I'm grabbing something and press blue, now I activated some points. Any tool you use has lots of additional settings. You can get them with the purple button, so I can have them go away if I don't want them. Or if I want to be more specific, I can modify them. But basically, you have lots of input. But with my selection sphere, for example, in here, I can move points. I can modify them. For example, grabbing plus trigger means add. So grab, trigger, adds points. And then grab plus the red button means delete. So those are the main things I want you to be familiar with. How do you add? How do you remove? How do you move? Because anything you do, as simple as a sketch line and as complicated as a high-end, sub-D model, it's the same input. Anytime I get close to the mirror plane, it will snap. So for example, if I'm doing a center line, all I have to do is snap it to the center, and now it's a perfect center line that I can modify. And and so on. For moving, let's say I'm done with this sketch line. Well, look at the check mark. Always look at your controllers because you have many more options. So now I'm done. Most of what you'll do is really about selecting something and then another operation. So when I'm selecting, look at the options I have. I have the color wheels. If I'm selecting and press the black button, now I can change the color of this line, and you even have more materials up here, but we don't have to worry about that. For example, if I want to duplicate this, it's just select and trigger, and you can duplicate it many times, for example, if you want. Okay, everybody. So far, so good. Any questions? This is more of a quick intro, but I'll build a package pretty soon. If you want to be precise, something I highly recommend is rather than just grabbing and then clicking the trigger, look how I lost my original position, right? I'm pressing the red button to go back, by the way. Something you can do is precision moving. So when you are hovering over an object and then press the grab button and trigger, you can duplicate it. but you lose its position. But when I align both controllers in an axis, look how this red line appears, which means I can move it along a very specific axis. If I do the same vertically, a blue line appears. If I do the same on the x-axis, green. This is a really good pro tip if you want to be precise and start moving things. And even more so, doing more complex things, such as not only moving, but moving and duplicating. So for example, it's already aligned. I haven't pressed anything, but I will press my grab and trigger. And look at how now I'm duplicating off of an axis. And I can have precision duplication like this, for example. Very, very precise. So that's for the lines. Surfacing is really powerful too. You have different options, the same one as point mode, for example. I'm going to change the color so we can see the difference. But basically with my left trigger, I can start the beginning point, and with my right, I drop a point. So for example, something I can do is just kind of drop a few points. And notice how it's not perfect, but the good news is I can select it and then blue for editing. And I can start really, really dialing in those points. I won't get into surfacing in sub D yet, just know that it's really powerful. So right now, let me delete a couple things so we can see it better. The surface I just created is in a method called sub D, subdivision. Sub D will be very, very powerful and very helpful for you, especially in this studio, because sub D allows you to model very complex surfacing. So look at how so far, for example, I'm just kind of filling in the gap, just adding a surface that more or less matches this, but sub D means I can add more division. So if I click on here, I can add another one, for example, and this is more or less matching, but then I can get it much more complicated. So look at, I can add, I can modify, I can extrude. So sub D, as you can see very quickly, creates very complex surfacing. And how it works is basically one patch at a time, but you can modify the surface, the patch, the points, or the edges. And for example, if I extrude this edge right here and I snap this point to this one, it joins it. So it's a smart surface. Notice how pretty quickly it's doing that. So I won't go into too many details. This is sub-D surfacing. Let's begin the actual package part. But does anyone have any questions so far? That was more of a refresher. Hopefully, many of the things I just talked about are things that you've been experimenting with. So creating simple lines, duplicating, moving along an axis, removing, editing points. All of those are pretty basic commands. So this is basically part 2. So part 2. And actually, Gravity Sketch has text, by the way, so you can create very, very nice presentations. So this is how you would create your package drawing from the beginning. So brand new file, make sure in your settings that you're in under mirror plane. So it gives you all the control you need. I like to have the stage floor just so basically it updates as I go. So for example, if I do something endlessly big, my floor starts growing. Then, your layers, we don't have anything yet. So step number 1 will be perhaps well, in this case, I'm going to use a reference image. In the case of yours, you'll start with your mannequin, but I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm looking into my folders. These are some of the sketches I've brought in, and I'm looking for one that I can use for the demo. Let's use maybe this one. So notice how with my selection sphere, I can grab this and I can bring it to the space. I can get rid of my menu. If I bring it close to the mirror, it snaps automatically. So it did that by itself. And then with control move, I can move it. I don't need to modify it just yet. So the first step will be go into the prefabs, and then let's start with a real person. So remember the demo from Gravity Sketch from Brett. Rather than grabbing the person and putting them in the scene, that's wrong because you don't know what scale they're in right now. the proper way to do it is grab the person, but drop them in this box here. When you drop them there, it places them, but they're not 100% placed yet. But look at the settings here, 1-to-1 scale, so I know exactly this is a 95th percentile person. You can click on the arrows to change the orientation and so on, but I click OK. So now I have an 100% 1-to-1 scale person. If I zoom in to 100%, which is right here, and I put myself, and also know how to navigate, with this button, this side trigger, I can move and rotate, but if I do both triggers at the same time, I can zoom in and out, and if you want to navigate quickly, you use both. I can do that. But basically, if I zoom into 100% and I put myself in the point of view of this user, I know anything I do is exactly 1-to-1 scale. So this, whatever it is that I just sketched, this is 1-to-1 scale. So in real life, it would be about as big as my hands are covering it right now. So that's pretty important. And just like with any object, if I selected and press my blue button, I have editing points. So in the case of this person, I haven't done anything quite yet, but maybe let's pretend that they're on a somewhat of a sitting position. So moving some of these. And notice how I have many options. So if with my right thumbstick here, my joystick, I can swipe right, and then I have more options. It's with the green dots, it's a little bit simpler, but if you want it to be very specific, I can toggle between those, and I can even move an individual fingertip if I wanted to, right? But anyways, this one allows me to bend the knees a little bit and just kind of pretend that they're sitting down, and then maybe in a more relaxed position. So this is step one. I have a user 1-to-1 scale. I can go to my layers and, for example, click on this one and say, this one is going to be called person. And I can create a new one and say, just reference. And look at how this image from before, I can grab it and just simply drop it in my layer. And now it's in the reference layer, and you can lock layers, which is pretty nice. Okay, I hope so far so good. Please let me know if there's anything specific that you want to know how to do. So step one, bring a 1-to-1 scale person. Step two, use another prefab, which is the chassis. This is a prefabricated chassis that Gravity Sketch has. It has lots of very, very nice tools. One thing I was telling some of you is the vehicle package you do, try to make it as efficient as possible. What I mean by that is vehicles have to move around cities, so they can't be as big as you want them to be. They have to be a specific size for a reason, so justify that. I'm gonna first move my user, somewhat on the inside of the car. Actually, let me rotate them for a moment. You don't have to worry about exactly how I did this just now. All I did was just rotate them the other way. And I'm gonna go back to my chassis. And now look at how I start modifying. So basically, let's say this car, which some of you are doing, it's for 4 people. So this car is for 4 people. This is just a starting point. And I have my person, so I can, for example, let's put 2 people pretty close. That gives me a good idea. And when I go back to my chassis, I can keep editing. So I'm gonna make it as compact as possible. They have enough space here. Maybe move it a little bit out. Maybe I can grab my people and just give them a little bit of space this way. Then maybe if it's for 4 people, I can, well, let me just delete and rotate. Many of these things will be pretty intuitive once you begin doing them. So anyways, I'm moving this person here. And remember, this is a 1-to-1 scale person, so I can zoom out, in and out, but when I'm at 100%, which I am now, this is what it should feel like to be inside of this car. And the person in front of me will be that far. Gravity Sketch, by the way, has measurement tools. So under your tools panel, this one over here has measure. So for example, I can know exactly at any given moment how big the wheelbase is. You can use feet and inches if you want to, but basically knowing that my users are one-to-one scale means every measurement I get is accurate. So anyways, let's go back to the chassis because this is a whole editing process. What I'm trying to do right now is create a vehicle just big enough for these 4 people, but not bigger than it needs to be. So far it seems like a pretty good, at least square, right? And then I can probably play with the wheel size just a little bit to make it feel more planted, maybe a bit wider if I want. But so far, this should be a pretty good beginnings. You know, most of the important things are here for people. Remember the design requirements for people, maybe facing each other. And in this case, it's getting there. So now look at how I have a reference image. So the next step I want to do is maybe use this reference image as part of my package process. So what I'm going to do is lock, and the chassis itself came with its layer, but I can lock it and I can lock people. So the only thing I can select right now is the image, the reference layer. So what I'm going to do is probably use a side view. Well, actually, this one is, let's disregard this sketch right here just because this was micromobility for one person. But the idea is you bring a sketch, and maybe I'll just do a simple sketch to recreate that. So in a new layer, I go to my stroke tool, and basically what I want to do is start carving out the volume of how big this thing needs to be. If you look at your options, you know, you can sketch anywhere. One of the options I have is called planar. Planar means sketching on a plane. So anything I do will be actually on the mirror plane, for example. But in the case of this, let me see if I can. Okay, I just recentered it. So what I'm going to do is pretty much align the plane and actually remove planar for now. And then basically I have my wheels, so I'm just sketching the center line. And this you can modify. So very quickly, just did something quick. This is a starting point, and then I can snap my points to the center so they're right, you know, at the center line. And more or less what you can start doing is look at the people and more or less start tightening up some of these corners. It probably can go a bit lower in here because they already have space for their heads. And then this is not a design sketch. Again, it's more of a functional sketch. So all I'm trying to figure out is really how big does this need to be? I would argue it probably doesn't need to be any bigger than this. Trying to match it more or less symmetrically, more or less. Probably a bit bigger than it needs to be. It can come a little bit lower. If I press my purple button, once I'm in the editing menu, I can access more tools. So in some of those more tools, I can change, for example, the width. I would try to make it nice and narrow. I can simplify the points. I can do a couple different things. One thing I want to do right now is, remember, you're creating a package model, and I have my center line. So I want to duplicate this one and extrude it out so I have a better idea of volume. So let's put ourselves in one-to-one scale, 100% in here. So far it seems like, well, let's put ourselves here. So far I have a little bit of clearance, right? And you can actually measure these kinds of things. So going back to the measurement tool, I can say right now, and let me get a different color. Right now, I have about 15 centimeters, so a couple inches of headroom. That's okay. I have between knees 15, and you can change the measurements again in your settings. But this is a nice first step. If you want it to be more precise, I can, for example, start editing the duplicate sketch, and to this one, maybe bring the points a little bit lower, just so it's more of a curved object. And then this is functional, right? You don't have to design anything, but it's functional. So I'll probably sketch out what the door opening more or less would be. So more or less here, more or less here. So just nice and simple. And I could probably move. The benefit of VR is you can see everything from every angle. So if something is odd in one view, it probably means you have to move it in another view. Okay. So far, let's say this is the beginnings of my package. This layer one, I can call it, sketch one, for example. Right now, if I lock all my layers but the sketch layer, means I can select everything in here. Once I'm selecting it, I can press the color wheel and I can change the colors. Let's make it black, for example. I can create a new layer, lock it. It's all about the design requirements. What I'm trying to do is create and mock up all the requirements. So 4 people, more or less this big. Storage is another one. So I can go to my volumes. And there are some pre-made volumes that I can use. So for example, let's see. I'm in the layer here. So you can select, let's say, a soft cube, and it's nice because it's pre-made. So I can drop anything in here. I'm gonna change the color, but when I modify it, it's pre-made, so I don't have to worry too much about it. Let's say this is for a family of 4, and proportionally, I mean, you can measure this exactly and you can be accurate, but for the demo, I'm just gonna keep it simple. Let's say this is for a weekend trip for them. So I'm gonna start placing some objects. Let's say this is storage behind my users, and maybe there's the same in the front. So that's quite a bit already. And toggling between my layers, I can move, for example, these points a little bit outward, so it creates more space, and I can do the same for the other. And honestly, we're getting pretty close. You don't have to complicate things too much. Maybe one final thing I would do is think of the experience this car really creates. And let's say that, well, let's mock up a quick chair, for example, a seat for my user. So surface, point mode, I'm gonna choose red, nice and simple. So I have one of my users in here. Let me do that, and I'm in a new layer. So this can be very nice and simple for now. It's functional, but already I'm starting to get an idea of how big a chair needs to be. It's not perfect, and that's okay. Again, this is functional. I should just know more or less what it's supposed to do. So this is a chair, and I can duplicate it and then basically rotate it 180 degrees. All of these things you'll know how to do as soon as you start playing with the tool. And then basically, more or less, so I'm mocking up all the basic touch points. Let's talk about another one. Let's say I'm in my user perspective. Maybe I want to have tools for doing some work, for example. So in my surfaces, maybe something I want to mock up and I'm not designing it is, maybe I want to have some kind of a surface that goes from the wall and then comes out. So kind of like an airplane tray or something like that. So just bear with me. Something simple just for my users, so kind of an individual table. And remember, this is functional, so it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm kind of moving it out, and I can taper some of the points, for example, so it's more dynamic. And let's say in my design later, what it does is it folds it back or something. But anyways, so these are the 2 parents, for example, getting their work done. And now that I have this, I can actually be more precise. I can move it here. I can get my user and actually put their hands more or less there. So getting more precise. And then, yeah, whatever it needs to be. One final thing is the chassis that I had from before. Once I like what I have, and this is a good starting point, I can commit to it. So convert to geometry, basically right here. Once I do that, like it says, it basically creates actual objects from it. And then basically, from here, we're pretty close. It actually has a floor, so I'll move it up. Honestly, this is a good enough package. at least to begin with, it has most of the things that I would need. And in the orthographic view, for example, now I can see what each of those views look like, as you can see from up here, right? And you can visualize it. For the assignment, please take some screenshots. So in my settings, I can remove the ground floor, for example. Let me actually unlock all the layers. I think this is a little bit out of place, so I'm just aligning it a bit better. Okay. So let's say I'm done with this package. I go to my save and export. Make sure that you're saving in the cloud so you can access your sketch in landing pad. But then I go to take screenshot. And then basically for my package page, I can take screenshots. I'm going to activate transparent background. I recommend you do that so it doesn't show that gradient. It's actually a PNG if I do that. And then nice and simple, you know, some kind of a somewhat of a side view, maybe a perspective view, maybe a front rear view. I can take top view, and the benefit is, remember, we have orthographics, and I can actually export and save orthographic images from it. So all in all, everybody, this is what I expect. Does anyone have any questions from this? Or something you're not sure about how I did it? Those are pretty much the steps. Just know that, let me show you, so that this is what's due. What I'm going to show you is not what's due, but what we will start doing from next week on. So the package you present on Tuesday, we will use as an underlay to actually start designing. So since I have all of this data that I can take screenshots from any angle, basically in here, what I can do is duplicate the whole thing. I have a perfect duplicate. And since I have the same layers, I can just lower the opacity of some of the layers that I don't need. For example, these. Then I can create a new one and call it Sketch 2. And same process, stroke, maybe choose a different color. But at the beginning of your ideation process, you will start playing with different configurations of this. So maybe for this second version, I will play with different ways of putting these people. Maybe in this second version, I will actually sit all of them sideways because it's an autonomous card. It doesn't have to, they don't have to be facing frontwards. It's more of a like a lounge setup, which means everything I did before is probably outdated now. So I still have the same volume pieces, but now I have to configure them differently. So this is a different sketch, and in my sketch 2, maybe I start playing with a different proportion, and I say, maybe it doesn't have to be symmetrical, or maybe, I don't know, just starting to play with some of the features. For example, a window. So I snap this to the center, and then I start sketching around it, and maybe all the way through. This will be my glass, so it's really exposed to the outside. And again, the benefit of VR is can zoom in to 100%, and I'm sitting and feeling, and you know, it would be pretty cool to be in a card like this, where you have your people next to you. And maybe as a design tool, this allows me to think, okay, what can we do with this whole surface in front of us? Maybe that whole surface is an augmented display all the way through. And then you can bring images, PNGs, textures, and you can actually animate what that looks like. But anyways, I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna save this sketch so it's in the cloud, save. And I don't think I have a name for it yet, so I'm gonna call it, let's call it demo FMD1. Okay, so it should be saved, and look at what I can do now. If I exit out of here, basically I can go to landing pad. If I refresh in here and I filter through sketches, I should be able to find it. Let's see. Scooter, unless I saved it in the UC space, which could be there. Sketches and references. Let's see. It should be here. So maybe it's in the UC space. It hasn't updated. Let's see why. It really should be here. And let me check again, just where it's saved. Save sketch of the demo. Okay, yeah, I had not saved it. Here it is, saving. And now we are good. So same process, go back. And here it is. So, and I can actually visualize it in landing pad. This is a somewhat newer feature too. I can load it in here and look at how you can even export screenshots from it. And I can toggle the different layers as well, like I was doing before. So when I go back to the original one, some of the layers are off. Now they're back. I can export the actual model from here. I can export and import different things, take screenshots. You can also do that from VR. Okay, everybody, questions off of this? Basically, those are two ways of doing it. You can still use Fusion. I recommend you give it a shot to Gravity Sketch. I hope you saw that it's really not that hard just yet, and it's building up on top of what we know already. So I'm gonna stop our demo right here.